Assalamu alaikum class. I hope you are doing fine. We are going to continue with our next lecture, and our topic for today is uh, biomechanics of gait. Now, let us first discuss about this gait. Now, gait is basically bipedal locomotion. This is a functional task requiring complex interactions and coordination among most of major joints of your body. Particularly when concerning gait, the lower extremity is extremely important in this regard. Now, this fundamental task has been the subject of a study for a long time. Gait analysis and gait training is one form or is an important factor for understanding the human locomotion. Now, biomechanics of gait needs to be broadly understood by both the clinicians and the researchers alike. So, for this reason, gait has an important role in the understanding the overall function of the human body. For example, alterations or changes in your gait or behavior can show that there is some disturbance in the normal joint or muscles that are controlling your lower limb. So alterations can lead to altered gait posture, then can lead to pathologies. Moving onwards, we will now talk about some important facts. First, you must know what are the objectives for this lecture. Uh, by understanding this lecture thoroughly, you will be able to distinguish between the kinematics and the kinetic measures of the walking. You will understand the phases of the gait cycle and the beginning and ending point of each of these phases. You will also be able to explain how the movements of the pelvis, lower extremity, hip, knee, ankle, and the subtalar joint interact with each other during your stance phase. So let us continue and talk about or define gait. Now, what is gait? When we talk about normal gait is basically a series of rhythmical, alternating movements of the trunk and limbs which result in the forward progression of the center of gravity. So this is the proper definition of gait. Alternating movements between your limbs resulting in the forward progression of your center of gravity. Then that means as you push a step forward, then another, and then another, as you continue forward, your center of gravity is progressing along with you. Hence, this is termed as gait. Uh, some anatomical considerations that are necessary for understanding gait uh, are understanding hip motion, knee motion, ankle and foot motion, and the upper body motion. So we will now study them first. First is hip. Now when we talk about hip, during gait, motion at this joint occurs about the coxofemoral or the hip joint. And if you remember, it is a triaxial joint. Then that means it allows movement like flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and the rotations. Now, among that, the flexion and extension occurs about a medial lateral axis. Abduction and adduction about an anterior posterior axis. Internal and external rotation occurs about a longitudinal axis. Now, we know that flexion and extension movements are of the highest amplitude. Motions in the other two planes are substantial and consistent both within and between the individuals. So, what I'm trying to say, class, is that during movement of the hip in gait, flexion and extension are the major movements that are occurring. Apart from that, adduction and abduction and small amount of rotations also occur along with them. Uh, as you can expect, Impairments in any or all of the three movement planes can cause problematic deviations of the typical gait pattern of the hip and other joints. So for normal locomotion, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and your rotations must be normal and aligned with one another. Now let us talk about knee. Now when we talk about knee, about 3 degrees of freedom of angular rotation are usually possible during gait. The primary motion in knee is again flexion and extension about a medial-lateral axis. Now, internal and external rotation also occur about a longitudinal axis. If you remember, when your knee is slightly flexed, small amount or rotations are allowed at the knee joint. Now, another thing that is important is the abduction or adduction. When I'm saying this, I'm actually talking about the varus and valgus that is present at the knee. This usually occurs around an anterior posterior axis. So it may occur during normal locomotion, but it is restricted due to soft tissue and bony constraint. Normally, your knee is designed in such a way, flexion extension is allowed, small amount of rotations are also allowed, but valgus and varus movements are restricted due to bony alignments and soft tissue constraints. So, for example, if there is a person who is flexible, in that person, maybe there is a chance of deviation to occur. Now, we will talk about ankle and foot. The ankle motion is restricted by morphological constraints of the talocrural joint, which permits only plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. So, plantar flexion and dorsiflexion are the main movements that occur during gait. Now, although frequently modeled in gait analysis as a rigid segment, the foot is required to act as both as a semi-rigid structure, for example, as a spring during weight transfer and a lever arm during push-up. When we talk about spring, you can say it as, for example, when a person is pushing or putting his foot on the ground, the arch is actually flattened. This is to absorb some of the ground reaction forces. So when it flattens, it actually acts as a spring. And when the person pushes the foot off, the spring releases and it helps the person to propel or move forward. So foot is in this way a semi-rigid structure, and it is a rigid structure that permits adequate stability to support body weight. Again, foot also acts as a supporting structure and stabilizes your entire body during gait movements. Now, the movement of the ankle, subtalar, tarsal, metatarsal, and the phalangeal joints contribute to the smooth progression of the body's center of mass through the space through which it is moving. There are actually constant adjustments in these joints in response to the characteristics of the supporting terrain and to the action of the muscles that cross through them. For example, if a person is moving through a rough area which has too many crests and troughs, the gait or the body's structures compensate adequately to allow for this movement to occur. Now, the loss of this normal motion or muscular function at these joints uh, has a direct effect not only on the foot and ankle, but also on the remainder of the joint of the lower extremity. So, if there's a pathology in your foot or ankle, it can alter or affect the movements of the knee and hip. So, hip, knee, and ankle foot are all conjoined with one another, affecting, if one muscle is affected, it will affect the gait and in turn affect the whole joint mechanism, leading to an abnormal gait. Now that Hip, knee, and ankle foot marks the main part of your gait. But what about the upper body? What role does the upper body have in uh, your gait? Now, the pelvis and thorax may be considered separately as a rigid unit comprising the head, arms, or trunks. Uh, Usually, this segment, head, arm, and trunks, are collectively known as H, A, and T, uh, head segment. So, head, arm, and trunk are the head segment. Now, the upper limbs and head have not received as much attention as the trunk and lower limbs in studies. So, for example, there are studies which have studied the effect of trunk uh, movement on gait, but not so much as the movement of arm. uh, 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 Studies that do exist indicate that shoulder motions occur primarily as flexion and extension, and internal and external rotation at the glenohumeral joint. So, uh, small movements at the shoulder joint of flexion, extension, and some rotation uh, seems to have a role, somewhat important role in the gait as well. Now, these motions are generally passive and are a resultant of the lower body movement. Then that means that if you are moving your legs during gait, your arms in a rhythmic fashion moves along with your lower limb. So this is something that occurs during normal gait locomotion. Now, a person can voluntarily, if he wishes to, he can, to some extent, hinder this by consciously not allowing his arms to move. Although it does not affect gait that much, but allowing the arms to move freely seems to be part of the normal gait as well. Apart from that, uh, the reciprocal arm swing also seems to limit the angular momentum of the trunk. For example, if your legs are moving, the angular momentum is produced in the trunk and it seems to be counteracted by your arms. So this is their role. Apart from that, elbow flexion extension and forearm pronation and supination usually also occur. Cervical spine motion is primarily in flexion extension, some small amounts of movement at the spine, and rotation as well to stabilize the visual gaze or facilitate the vestibular ocular reflex as the body is propelled through the environment. And that means, class, that when you basically move forward, some small amount of changes or movement also occur at your cervical spine to adjust the gaze. For example, to look straight forward when you are walking in a straight line, some amount of head adjustment is necessary. So these are the anatomical considerations which mainly occur. Hip, knee, ankle, and foot we have studied, and the last was upper body. Let's continue. Now this is important in understanding that uh, how to understand gait, we need some methods to help us understand or analyze this gait. So, what is necessary is to measure certain characteristics of the gait which are understandably important. This can include the stride analysis, angular kinematic analysis, foot pressure analysis, even electromyographic analysis have also been conducted. We will not discuss all of them, but we will know, or you should know, some important elements in this regard. For example, in just I've said in the stride analysis, the temporal sequence of the stance and swing phase are quantified using simple tools like a stopwatch and ink and paper, or some electromagnetic instrument such as a pressure sensitive switches which are embedded in the shoe inserts or applied to the bottom of the foot. Stride analysis data are used to calculate basic time distance variables, which I will discuss with you later in detail. So you just have to remember that stride analysis is helpful in understanding the temporal sequence of the stance and swing phase. I will discuss these temporal variables in uh, later on in the slideshow. So let's continue forward. Now, if you look at this PowerPoint diagram, this is basically a schematic diagram of the temporal sequence of the grade cycle, or stride, showing the complete right side. If you see the shaded area over here in the deep blue part, that is the right part, and the left strides. So notice how this uh, phase is occurring. So let me show you in a better way. So this is the right stance and the right swing. I hope you remember what were the phases of the stance phase and what were the phases of the swing phase. Now, starting from here to here is actually one complete gait cycle. So if you remember what I've told you, what a normal gait was, an alternating movement of trunk and limb, it is actually composed of stance phase and swing phase. We will discuss them in the next slide. You have to just remember that the stance phase is 60% and the swing phase is 40% of the gait. So that was one method of analyzing the gait, which I am trying to describe to you. uh, the parts written here is that HC is heel contact, this here. HC is heel contact, R is for right, RTO is right toe off. So from heel contact or heel strike to toe off is actually 60% of your stance phase. Now from right to off to the heel contact or just before the heel contact is your right swing phase, which is composed of the 40% of your gait cycle. So 60 plus 40 is 100, which constitute one full gait cycle. uh, so this is just to explain to you how gait analysis is being conducted. You will get a further detail and a better understanding when I will tell you about this in greater detail. Uh, so you can listen forward again. Now, you have to understand that the uh, angular kinematic analysis about the angular kinematics of the gait is used or studied through electrogoniometry, uh, accelerometry, etc. So these are certain advanced techniques. Now, electrogoniometers are available in uniaxial and multi-axial configurations and are usually attached directly to the body segments on either side of the joint or the joint of interest for the direct measurement of the angular displacement. I hope you know what was angular displacement. So this electrogoniometer is used in such a way. Now the accelerometers that I talked to you about, now they are attached to the body segments of interest for the direct measurements of segmental acceleration, for which segmental velocities and displacements are to be derived. So these accelerometers are used for uh, this reason. uh, Other technique which is also used in analysis of gait is optoelectronic techniques. Uh, this involves the use of a video or digital cameras to capture images of an individual while he is, let's say, he's walking during normal gait. Such systems usually include the use of some reference markers, which are attached to the subject to estimate the location of joint axis and to assist in digitization. Such camera systems require careful calibration to locate the anatomical markers and often are permanently installed in a gate type laboratory. So basically, to give you a simple understanding, a digital instrument is used. For example, a person is walking, certain instruments are attached to that person, and as he walks, a computer or camera is through a digital medium is mirroring the parameters of the gait as the person moves forwards. Uh, Force plate and the foot pressure techniques. I'll just briefly talk about the foot pressure. Now, this force plate and foot pressure analysis techniques involve the recording of information at the foot floor interface, which is at the level of your foot during the stance phase of the gait. Now, the force plate measure the resultant ground reaction force beneath the foot and the location of its point of application in the plane of the supporting surface. Now, the pressure plates or insoles measure the load distribution between the foot during the stance phase. And that pressure plates is inserted in such a way, for example, take your shoe and in the sole of that foot, a pressure plate is inserted. So when the person walks, he presses the foot downwards, pressure is induced on the plate, and when this is done, it is then measured by that particular force plating instrument. Force plates are often combined with angular kinematic methods for the calculation of the kinetic variables like, for example, joint movements. EMG is used to record the muscle activation during walking. You can probably imagine that proper muscle activation or normal muscle activation is crucial in normal gait or movements. If muscles are weak and activation is impaired, that particular joint will not move to the point we required it to be. And because of that, uh, gait or abnormal gait pattern can develop. Now, for this purpose, both surface and intramuscular sensing techniques are used in the gait analysis. EMG is typically combined with stride and angular kinematic analysis to provide information about the muscle phasic muscle activation patterns. That, for example, how muscle activates. So, the combined technique can also be used to analyze gait. Now, EMG also helps to explain the motor performance underlying the kinematic and kinetic characteristics of the gait itself. So, class, this is all about methods of gait analysis. Uh, talk, talking about this particular pattern of gait and its important characteristics, we will now share or understand it with uh, the lecture moving forward. Now, as it is written here, gait is basically a style, a manner or pattern of walking. From individual to individual, this pattern may vary. For example, you must have noticed that your pattern of walking will be different from mine, a female from a male, an old person from a young person, a person who has a poor neck posture or uh, let's say poor kyphotic spine will have a different posture compared to someone who is healthy, active. So this gait pattern varies from person to person. Uh, Now, this uh, particular movement or sequence is termed as the gait cycle. Uh, this bipedal locomotion is actually a cyclic activity consisting of two phases for each of the limbs, a stance phase and a swing phase. Gait is relatively symmetric with regards to the angular motions of the major joints and the muscle activation patterns and the load bearing on the lower extremity. So normally the muscle activation and the weight bearing is relatively uh, equal when locomotion occurs. Uh, so to define a gait cycle is to say that a full gait cycle is defined by the occurrence of a sequential stance phase and swing phase by one limb. So what happens is uh, if you see the image above here, from right heel contact to right toe out to finally right heel contact again. This entire phase is considered one gait cycle. So this is what a gait cycle is. Or another way to define a gait cycle is period of time from one heel strike to the next heel strike of the same limb, as shown in that image above. Uh, so because of this reason, the limits of a stride uh, can be demarcated by the occurrence of a specific gait event. And that gait event is basically normally considered to be the initial contact or the first contact from one limb to the next occurrence of the same event on the same ipsilateral limb. Normally or typically, heel contact or initial contact is used as the event that defines the limits of a stride. uh, like I've told you before, stance phase occupies 60% of the stride and consists of, you will study it further, usually consists of two periods of double limb support, that is the initial and the terminal part. What it means here, class, is that during the initial contact phase and at the terminal point, there is a double limb support phase where both of your limbs are actually on the ground. When the contralateral foot is in contact with the ground, an intermediate period of single limb support when the contralateral limb is engaged in swing phase occurs. Then that means there is a double support phase, and then there is a single limb support phase where only one limb is on the ground and the other limb is undergoing the swing phase. uh, so because of this, gait cycle has two phases, the stance and the swing phase. Stance phase occupies 60% of the gait cycle and the swing phase naturally occupies 40% of the gait cycle. We will discuss in further detail, but remember that stance phase can also be divided into 6 events and periods. uh, I will tell you them now and I will discuss in detail going further. They are usually initial contact or field contact, which is defined as the instant the foot makes contact with the floor. Uh, for example, let me show you in this phase. This first part here, note how the heel is contacting with the foot. This first part is the uh, initial contact phase. So after that is the loading response. This loading response is an interval during which the sole of the foot comes in contact with the floor and weight of the body is accepted onto the supporting limb. So this next phase where this foot is putting itself downwards, becoming in contact with the floor, that is the uh, foot flat phase, and after that is the phase or loading response when the forces are about to be transmitted through that particular joint. Another way of describing this gait cycle, stance and swing, is by forming this chart here. So that is the initial contact. Loading response is also known as foot flat. So there are two ways to describe it. Initial contact or heel contact, same thing. Loading response or foot flat are basically the same thing. Okay, now this loading response period usually coincides with the end of the initial double limb support at about approximately 10 to 12% of the stride. Uh, Now talk about mid stance. Mid stance is the period during which the tibia rotates over the stationary foot in the direction of the locomotion. So let's talk about mid stance. Notice here, class. After foot flat, there is movement on the tibia. Small amount of rotation is occurring here at the tibia, and forces are will be generated here when the tibia uh, bears the weight of your entire body. This is the mid stance. So, mid stance is the period during which the tibia rotates over the stationary foot in the direction of locomotion. The beginning of mid stance coincides with the single limb support and lasts from approximately 10 to 30% of the stride. Notice here, when the mid stance has been initiated, notice the foot. It is actually off the ground, just off the ground here. So this is the single limb support phase. Notice in the heel contact phase, the opposite foot is still on the ground. It will move forward later on, but this is the double limb support phase when both parts are at or on the level of the ground. Then comes the terminal stance. Terminal stance is also known as heel off. Notice the same foot. Here heel was on. Now heel will go off or the heel off. uh, this terminal stance or heel off is the period during which the weight of the body is transferred from the hind and midfoot regions onto the forefoot. It usually occurs from 30 to 50% of the stride and usually coincides with the beginning of the terminal double limb support. For example, this is the heel off. Notice the opposite foot, what is happening here. As the heel is going in the heel off phase, the foot is just about to be put on the ground. So it is coinciding with the double limb support phase again, which will occur soon. uh, so it occurs about 30 to 50% of the stride and coincides with the beginning of the terminal double limb support. Then is the pre-swing. The pre-swing or toe off. As you can see here, just before this foot will go into the swing phase, from heel off is the toe off, and it is coinciding with a double limb support phase. So this pre-swing occurs simultaneously with the terminal double limb support and lasts from 50 to 60% of the stride. During the pre-swing, weight is transferred onto the contralateral limb in preparation for the swing phase. So what is happening here? In the pre-swing phase, this weight will then transfer onto the opposite leg, and this limb here will now be prepared to go into the swing phase, which is next part of the gait cycle. Also, interesting to note is that the end of the pre-swing corresponds to the toe off, at which moment the foot breaks contact with the floor and thereby demarcating the beginning of the swing phase. So the percentages I have just shown you is the division of heel strike, foot flat to mid stance to heel off to pre-swing. Combine all these percentages, we get 0 to 60% of the full gait cycle, which is the stance phase. Here is the double limb support phase shown here. Now we will talk about the swing phase. The swing phase usually occupies approximately 40% of the gait cycle, and it is composed of three periods. The initial swing that lasts from 60 to 73% of the stride, about 1/3 of the swing phase, from toe off until the swinging foot is opposite to the stance foot. What is the early swing? The foot has gone off the ground. As soon as the foot goes off the ground, the early swing phase starts. Okay, class? So we continue forward. Then after that is the mid swing. Now this mid swing ends when the tibia of the swinging limb is vertically oriented and lasts from 73 to 80% of the stride. Though not shown here, mid swing will occur when this foot will go forward and becomes vertically forward oriented. That is the mid swing, and it will end when the tibia of the swinging limb is vertically oriented and its total percentage is 73 to 80% of the stride. Then is the terminal swing, lasts from 87 to 100% of the stride and ends at the moment of initial contact. Notice here, same foot, early swing, mid swing, not shown, but you understood the meaning, and the late swing. As soon as the foot becomes, or just before it comes in contact with the ground, is the part of the late swing. And when this person will put his foot forward or push it to the ground, again, the gait cycle will be complete, and then again, this phase will continue onwards. So it is basically class a cycle here. So what is this? Notice this image here coincides with the image over here. So this cycle will continue to repeat. Heel strike, foot flat, mid stance, heel off, pre-swing, early swing, mid swing, late swing, then heel strike, and then again. So this entire phase is one gait cycle. Let us briefly go to the definitions. We have understood what these phases are. So these definitions are just for your knowledge. It begins when the heel of one leg strikes the ground and with the toe of the same leg lifting off. 60% of the gait cycle. Uh, for your comfort, I have divided these phases here. You can see it for yourself. 2 to 10, 10 to 30, 30 to 50, and 50 to 60. Stance phase, gait contact or initial contact. Foot flat is the loading response. Mid stance, when the tibia is in the alignment. Heel off or terminal stance. Toe off or the placement. Swing phase represents the period between a toe off of one foot and the heel contact of the same foot. 40% of the gait cycle. Again, here it is shown here early, mid, and late swing 60 to 73, 87, 73 to 87, 87 to 100. Also called initial swing or acceleration phase, the mid swing phase, and the deceleration and the terminal swing phase. So class, this is all for today's lecture. Thank you for listening, and inshallah in the coming interactive session, we will study in further detail. You are expected to view this lecture, and in the online session, we will definitely discuss it before moving forward. So kindly view the slides, view the lecture, and if you have any questions, we will study it or do it in the online section. Thank you.